Most weekend woodworking projects don't fail because of skill. They fail because something breaks down before the build even gets going. You start with a clear idea. Maybe it's a bench, a table, a set of shelves. You've pictured it before. You know roughly how it should look, maybe even where it's going to sit. So you set aside time. You tell yourself this weekend is the one. This is when it finally happens. And then it doesn't. Somewhere between the idea and the finished piece, things stall out. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough friction to slow everything down. You spend the first hour looking for a plan, not building. Just searching. Tabs open. Diagrams that look promising. A few PDFs. Maybe something saved months ago that seemed useful at the time. Eventually, you pick one. It looks clean. Maybe even professional. Good photos. Clear layout. So you move forward. You get your materials. You clear space. You start cutting. And for a moment, it feels like progress. Then something small doesn't line up. A measurement that doesn't quite match the diagram. A step that jumps ahead without explaining what happened in between. A piece that technically fits, but doesn't sit right. So you pause. You go back, reread. Try to interpret what the plan meant. You make an adjustment, then another. Now, you're not following a plan anymore. You're guessing your way through it. That's usually where momentum starts to disappear. Because every decision now takes longer. Every cut feels riskier. Every step requires more second guessing than the last. By the time you get halfway through, the energy that got you started is already fading. And the project, it sits there. Not failed. Just unfinished. Waiting for the next weekend. This pattern repeats more often than most people realize. Not because the projects are too complex, and not because the person building them lacks ability, but because the process itself keeps breaking down in small, invisible ways. At first, it looks like a time problem. You think, I just need a full weekend. Or, I didn't have enough time to finish. But when you look closer, it's not really about time. It's about friction. Small interruptions that keep stacking up. Searching instead of building. Interpreting instead of following. Correcting instead of progressing. Individually, each one feels manageable. Together, they stop the project entirely. Most explanations stop at the surface level. They point to distractions, motivation, or lack of discipline. But those are symptoms. The real issue isn't that you don't finish projects. It's that the process you're following doesn't support finishing. Because a project doesn't fail at the end. It fails in the moments where the next step isn't clear. When you have to stop and figure something out that should have already been defined. When the plan shows what the final piece looks like, but not how to actually get there. That gap is where most projects stall. And once momentum is gone, restarting becomes harder than starting. You come back the next weekend, but now there's hesitation. You don't remember exactly where you left off. The uncertainty is still there. Maybe worse than before. So the project waits. And over time, you start to associate building with friction instead of progress. That's why some people can spend years wanting to build something and still have nothing finished to show for it. Not because they lack interest, but because every attempt reinforces the same experience. Start strong. Hit confusion. Lose momentum. Stop. What's often overlooked is how much of this comes down to structure. Not effort. Not tools. Not even experience. Structure. When each step is clearly defined, the process becomes predictable. You don't need to interpret. You don't need to guess. You don't need to constantly stop and rethink what you're doing. You just move forward. And that changes everything. Because progress builds on itself. One completed step leads naturally to the next. Decisions happen faster. Confidence increases. Momentum stays intact. The project starts to feel different. Not easier in the sense of effort, but clearer. And clarity is what allows a project to actually reach the end. That's the shift most people never experience. They assume finishing projects is about having more time, more space, or better tools. But those only matter after the structure is in place. Without that, even simple builds feel harder than they should. With it, even more complex projects become manageable. Not perfect, not effortless, but doable. And, more importantly, finishable. If you've noticed this pattern in your own projects, it's worth stepping back and looking at the process itself. Not just what you're building, but how you're building it. Because once that foundation changes, the outcome tends to follow. If you want to go deeper into this, there's a structured breakdown in the description that walks through how this process works step by step, and what to look for before you even make the first cut. You can also subscribe if you want more videos that focus on the thinking behind building, not just the building itself. And next time you start a project, pay attention to where things slow down. That's usually where the real problem is hiding.